Hey Ken, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good.
So, are you making me presenter?
Yes, I can. Give me one second here. Okay. Give myself a little scare there.
So, there are going to be two polls in there. Is that the?
I think I made like six, um,
Mhm.
just in case. One has the eight questions, but I understand, what your thoughts are on that. So
And this one is multiple choice. Yeah.
uh they're all multiple choice, select one response. Is that what
Oh
you mean?
no. I mean it's multiple choice, multiple response.
Oh, I don't think you can do, I don't know if you can do that in Zoom. All the polls are like that?
No, just the one.
The eight
Yeah.
response one?
Yeah. I mean
Okay. Let
that's
me see.
why it was specialized. That was an issue.
Let me see if I can edit that quick.
Okay.
Okay, I think it's done. Um, it behaved like I wanted it to, but I wish I would have tested it.
Well, let's try it. So if we launch the poll, oh, I can't see it. So see if you can choose multiple responses.
It looks like I can. It looks different to me.
Okay.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I won't submit so we don't blow it. Okay.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I can relaunch it anyway. So what's that? Okay.
Looks like we have a few people joining, by the way.
Yes, I see that.
I removed the waiting room just because of the number of people who respond.
I might as well share screen. All right. So are they seeing my screen?
Yes, that's your screen. Just don't
And
forget, I'll remind you to record at in 10 minutes.
just to confirm, you're still seeing my screen, right? It transitioned. I'm doing share
That's,
screen.
that's correct.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in a few minutes. Hi, Susan.
Hi, how are you?
I am good. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Nice to see so many people here.
Okay. It is 2 o'clock, but if you don't mind, we'll give a minute or two just for any latecomers to join. So I appreciate all of you joining on time. But if we can wait just one more minute and we will get started. Welcome. Okay. Why don't we get started? Hello, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our webinar today, put together by SchoolSims on difficult conversations around race, a simulation experience. My name is Ken Spiro. I am the CEO and founder of SchoolSims, formerly Ed Leadership Sims, for those of you who may have come across us prior to our name shift, if you will. And again, it is my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of our team to this experience. So before we get started, I want to ask a quick question and actually ask if I'm happy for you to chime in on vocally, but if you just want to do it in chat. The question that I'd like you to respond to is, if you could fill in the blank for me, I would greatly appreciate it. Blank is the best teacher. How would you fill in that? And it's not a person. I know many of us may know that best teacher, but in this case, how would you fill in the blank if it's not a person? If you could fill that in for me, I'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you, William. Okay, and I would say, that failure is actually experience, right? We have to experience the failure. Caring, that's good. Okay, so for the most part, almost everybody said experience in some form. We know that experience is the best teacher. Yet, when it comes to learning new skills, when it comes to changing behaviors, what do we tend to do? We tend to teach. We tend to instruct in some form. We tend to convey information about the way you need to do it, what you need to know. And yet we know, on the other hand, that experience is the best teacher. And so the thing that I find most challenging is that, and hopefully what you will see today, is that we find that we use simulation as an approximator of experience, right? It's going to be done in a safe place and it's not real. But hopefully it might as well be in certain circumstances, and we'll talk more about that. But we differentiate between how we learn from instruction versus how we learn from experience. Those are two different learning models at play. When we teach the right way of things, right? I'm going to tell you what you need to know. I'm going to tell you how to do it. I'm going to give you the framework. For instance, having difficult conversations, right? There are frameworks for having difficult conversations. I can tell you that. I can teach you that. But when it comes to, and we focus on best practices, right? Because we want to focus on the right way of things. And yet, as some of you mentioned in your postings, when it comes to experience, how do we best learn? What is the best way we learn? It's actually from making mistakes. It's actually from failure. So whereas on the one hand, when we teach the right way of things and we design things that way. When it comes to experience, we actually should be designing it with the idea of failure in mind, right? Not to encourage failure by any means, but to allow for people to experience it, because all experience, I would suggest to you that all experience is good, right? It's what you do with it that's important, right? You can poorly utilize an experience and therefore it could go badly. On the other hand, a bad experience can still be very beneficial from a learning standpoint because we reflect upon it and learn from it. So when we talk about this idea of a simulation experience around difficult conversations, that's what we're going to do today. It's going to be an experience. This webinar is not designed to teach you how to have difficult conversations. We're actually going to engage in difficult conversations so that we can have an experience and ideally do it amongst peers, do it amongst colleagues, where you have the chance to not only have the experience yourself, but also gain insights from the experience of others. And we'll talk more about that as we go, but I did want to set from an expectation perspective where things are with respect to what we're going to do today. So along those lines, in dealing with our current environment is extremely complicated, right? I have been struck by, I've been doing simulations, and we'll come back to this, for over 30 years. So I'm a carpenter with a hammer in my hand and everything looks like a simulation. You'll forgive me, I hope. But when I can't help but look at the challenges that we're experiencing, whether it be about the issues of race, whether it be about just school openings, right, and dealing with COVID, the trade-offs that are at play are incredibly stark, right? There are such, the decisions are so complicated, and it's really filled with, no matter where you go, no matter what decisions you make, they're going to be negative consequences. And so being sensitized to that, because we still need to make decisions, is really what we're going to focus on. And I was reminded of a quote. I was speaking with an assistant superintendent of one of our customers, And he reminded me of this, the work, Man's Search for Meaning, which is a book by Viktor Frankl, who is was a psychiatrist, a neurologist, who was a survivor of a concentration camp during the Holocaust. And he wrote this book shortly after that. And I find this quote to be particularly compelling, and especially for days like we are in today. And he writes that between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. I find that incredibly compelling, especially again now, right? We are experiencing lots of stimuli, and we have to respond. But it's important that we focus on that space that is there, that not to just be reactive. We have to be thoughtful, because inside of that, I think it's pretty safe to say we're not always going to get it right, but we can never not be thoughtful. We can never not be mindful, because otherwise, you know, as I want to say, the deer in the headlights isn't a good look for anybody, and rarely does it end well. And so the opportunity to be focused on this idea of when we're facing a stimulus, that we are thoughtful about our response. We're going to have to make a response, but it's something to bear in mind. And this is something that brought meaning or further depth to an observation that I've made. As I mentioned, I've been doing simulations for over 30 years. I've only more recently in K-12. And during that time, I've worked with leaders from across multiple industries around the world. And I would have to say that in working with administrators in schools, that the job of an administrator is probably the most pathetic leadership job I've come across. And I have to say, and I mean that with great respect, but nowhere have I seen a job in which the stakes are so high, we're dealing with our kids, the decisions are inherently complicated, and it's exacerbated by a group of stakeholders whose demands are so exclusive of each other, and that each one can be more irrational than the next. So really, no matter what you do from a decision-making perspective, you're going to get whacked. You're going to get knocked down. And that's not a question of if, it's a question of when and how many times. So that when I look at the skills required to effectively navigate in this realm, the two of the key skills that I think that are required are, on the one hand, the ability to exercise good judgment, right? We have to be able to be thoughtful. We have to be able to choose our response. But at the same time, even though the decisions themselves may be really, really gut-wrenching and hard and just so stressful, it's often not the decisions that get us into trouble, but the blowback. And there's always blowback. And so the issue is, what we want to have our administrators being able to be is, on the one hand, thoughtful, being able to exercise good judgment, and we need to be resilient. We need to have thick enough skin to continue to roll with it, to have the courage to make really complicated or tough decisions, and to know that even though I'm going to get knocked down, I need to do this, and to be prepared for what's coming, because not being prepared, again, that deer in the headlights, does not go well. And the thing about judgment and resilience that I find so compelling is that we can't teach either of them. I can tell you about them, but I can't teach you judgment. I can't teach you resilience. We only get better at them through experience. And as you all know, that school of hard knocks, if you'll excuse the language, really kind of sucks. And so what we're looking to do is find an opportunity to have safe experience, to have an opportunity to try stuff out, to make mistakes, to fail, and even fail miserably if necessary or if appropriate, but with the opportunity to learn from it and not to be scarred, as it were. Other than maybe then, you know, getting it wrong sometimes doesn't feel so good to the ego, but if that's the worst of it, then that's then we call that a win. So that's really what the simulations are designed to do and what the experience is designed to cover. Okay, and by the way, I would ask that if you have questions, please put them in chat or interrupt me. Sometimes, as given that I've been doing this for this area of focus, I tend to get caught up in the words and lose sight of that you might not be down my rabbit hole with me. So please feel free to interrupt or to chime in chat, and I will try to respond as they come in. So again, so that's really the focus. And just, you know, for those of you not familiar with simulations, they've been around for a long time, just not in K-12, which again, is surprising when you think about some of the other high stakes arenas like the military, aviation, healthcare. They all use simulation. They've been using simulations for decades, and really, and in corporate as well, but the stakes there aren't as high. And so now we are bringing this to the idea of why don't we have this opportunity for education, for leaders, and ultimately for teachers as well, but to have this opportunity to engage in this kind of exercise where we can learn from experience so that we can apply it when we face it in real life. So what is a simulation, right? So this may bring something to mind. You may have gone through some things. Simulation is, there's no taxonomy in the space, so everybody may have a different definition. So I do want to give you some insight into how we think about simulation. Again, it is kind of manufactured experience, okay, so you get that. Fundamentally, first of all, these are online, so they're eminently scalable. And again, we're going to play one, so you'll see it. But really the opportunity is when we talk about this idea of manufacturing an experience, what goes into that? How do we make it real-ish? How do we make it sticky, something that is eminently relatable? And for us, it begins with context, right? So this is not going to be kind of a desert island simulation or something that takes place elsewhere. We actually are going to do it in a school. The context is important because often in the decisions that we make from a leadership perspective, context is key. Being situationally aware is really, really important to the decisions that you make, because there's not going to be, because these are contextual issues and because we need experience to learn from them, it's not going to be the same thing every time, right? This isn't something that you can do the same way every time you face it. And so we want to create a recognizable, authentic context. And when we develop the simulations, we do them in collaboration with practitioners. So it is inspired by somebody's context. It doesn't have to be your context, right? Because we don't want it to be your buildings or your district or your people. But when you experience it, it could be, and they could be your people, because that allows from an engagement or from a participant perspective to actually see yourself in the action and because it's eminently relatable. Then in that context, we will simulate a problem of practice. Something will be presenting as a problem that you're going to have to navigate, and you're going to have to make decisions. Not one decision. This is not a one and done type scenario. This is actually going to be a series of decisions. You're going to navigate a problem that plays out over time and make anywhere from 6 to 10 decisions, because you're dealing not just with the need to exercise good judgment, but it is also that opportunity to deal with consequences. Because sometimes, again, it's not the decision itself that is the thing. You can feel really good about, I nailed it. I made that decision. It was great. I feel really good about myself. And then that stakeholder comes at you, that parent, that faculty member, that whatever it is, and they knock you sideways because you just weren't anticipating it. So we need you to experience consequences as well. So on the one hand, we want you to exercise judgment. We will think of it as a choose your own adventure type exercise. There will be choices to make, decisions to make, and we will make them. And then consequences will play out, and that brings on additional decisions, and that's the way the simulation plays out. Now, what's important also in this context is that experience really is, I believe, the best teacher, but only when we have the opportunity for reflection. If you don't have the opportunity to think about it, to reflect on what happened in the experience, then chances are you'll put your hand right back on that stovetop and you will burn yourself again. So the opportunity to have that learning really needs to come with reflection, which there is feedback that's provided by the sim. But what's also important is doing this in a group. We're going to do this collectively with the people that are here today. You can do them in large groups and small groups with a mentor, with a coach, whomever, because then you have that opportunity for ongoing feedback, ongoing insight that can happen, because you'll see things from your perspective. And that perspective is absolutely 100% valid. But it's not truth, right? Because the person sitting next to you, or whatever virtually, may have an equally valid perspective, that you're not aware of unless they tell you, right? Unless they share with you how they see things, how they think, their experiences in dealing with situations. And having that opportunity for that discourse, for that opportunity for collaboration, takes the learning and grows it dramatically. And the simulation is not only an experience in and of itself, but it creates a broader experience by the sharing of people's experiences. And that is where the learning process takes place. So what, if you'll forgive me, there's a couple other quick slides I want to just point out that I find compelling. So you'll forgive me if, since I have you you're here and listening, hopefully, you will find this equally compelling because they just jumped out at me. So this was a study I came across called the Millennium Project, which is done, I don't know if it's every year, every few years, but this one in particular from 2009 caught my eye. So if you can see the slide, you see that as you look around the globe, these 15 global challenges facing humanity: clean water, sustainable development, climate change, democratization, things that you would expect to see as global challenges. What I found so fascinating, what jumped out at me, is this number 9 on the bottom here, our capacity to decide. They determined, this group that put this study together determined that our ability to make decisions is a global challenge facing humanity. And nowhere did it become more clear to me than in K-12. On the one hand, administrators are faced with masses of data. It's really complicated to know which data are important, what to do with them, how you use them when you find them, what ones do you need on an ongoing basis. Interpretation, you can get lost in it. The whole concept of analysis paralysis could have been actually formed based on the challenges facing administrators. But on the other hand, you're not even a half a step from being a headline on the evening news. It's pretty scary stuff. And so on the one hand, you've got analysis paralysis. On the other extreme, you've got this fear of failure, I'm sure, but just fear. And how do you make decisions in that context? So sometimes just practicing making decisions, being able to just actually do something to move forward, even though you know it's going to go painfully, can be actually very, very beneficial. And so the opportunity to practice decision making is important. Now, this is a deep slide. I'll give you a moment to process it. As human beings, we are mindless, habit-forming creatures. Critical thinking is not a natural skill. Present company possibly accepted, but critical thinking is not a natural skill. We like to form habits. We like to get good at something and then stop thinking about it because that's the way we are, right? And sometimes that's good, right? Riding a bike, you wouldn't want to have to be so thoughtful about riding a bike and learn it every time, right? So it's good when we can, some of these things can be habits, and that's fine. But when we're running a school or running a district or working with kids, mindlessness is never going to work. Because again, the goal here is to really accept the fact that we're going to get it wrong. The goal here cannot be to always get it right, because that's not realistic. The question is, are you prepared when it goes wrong, even when you weren't expecting it? And so that's the things that we're looking at, being able to look at, is that critical thinking. Because if you get caught, when you get it wrong, when you make that mistake, but you thought about it, at least you have an answer when you get called on it. At least you have a thought that says, you know what, I did this because, and you may not have been right, and how you present that is going to obviously be different every time, but not being thoughtful is going to go actually much worse. And one last thing before we get started is just to point out, when we think about simulation, what's important about experience is that, as distinct from how we learn from instruction, when we teach one thing at a time, right? Because we can only do one thing at a time, right? We cover, so this is a matrix, and you don't have to get caught up in the specifics of it, but really what this is, we've aligned the simulations to the PCEL standards. So across the top, you have the 10 PCEL standards, and down the left, the column vertically is the list of simulation titles that we have. And I highlighted the one about that we're going to do on race. And just to show you that, when you're having an experience, it's never just about one thing, right? There's never, it's not like we walk into a little bubble and we say, oh, we're stepping into the equity bubble. There's nothing else happening right now, right? This is the only issue. So if that were the case, we'd actually probably get it right more of the time. The fact is, there are always trade-offs. There's always more than one thing at play, even amongst leadership standards. You can't be good at everything all the time. And so it's important to recognize that there are trade-offs at play. Sometimes those trade-offs are obvious, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes there are these issues, sometimes there's budget, there's stakeholders, whatever the case may be. There are all kinds of things that are at play, and it's important to be sensitized to the fact that there's plus, there's minus. There's variances of plus or variances of minus, but there are things at play, and we need to be, as much as we can, to capture them in our thinking. That's what we're evaluating between when we face that stimulus, it's that space where we're considering the trade-offs and preparing for our response. Okay, any questions before we get started? Okay, then let's play. So as I mentioned, all the simulations are, well, first of all, they're online, so we're going to play it here, and we will be sharing the recording with everybody, so you will have access to this once it's completed, and certainly for those who weren't able to attend. But as you see here, we have Teachers 21. They're an outfit for those of you, maybe some of you may be familiar with them. They're up in the Boston area. Now they're part of William James College. We collaborated with them on the development of this simulation, working with some of their practitioners on the formulation of this experience. Now, before we get started, I do want to say, I want to reiterate that and encourage, this is an experience. It's not designed to be the experience, which means if you see something that you don't like or that you think is wrong, then by all means point it out. Why? Because it's valuable, because that you see something differently, it touches you in a particular way, and these can be provocative. So when we do these with participants, that's what we hope for, right? If we made things obvious, it wouldn't be much of an experience, would it? Because everybody would choose the obvious choice. And so as you look at this, as you think about this, as something strikes you, please speak it, because that's how the learning, how you're experiencing it is incredibly valuable to everybody who's going through it. That insight can be the difference between making a good decision and bad decision the next time in real life. So just bear that in mind, and I will try to encourage that throughout, because again, if you're seeing something, chances are others are seeing it also. It's just a matter of whether somebody says it and shares it from a peer-to-peer basis. And everything is valid. The one quick thing I will point out from a navigation perspective is that there's no back button. That's by design, because we don't do mulligans, right? When we're having real life experience, you don't get a do-over. You have to deal with it, even when you make mistakes. And so here is the same. If you do something and you don't like the choice, well, it's still going to be an experience. It may just have been a path you would have not liked to have chosen, but often that happens to us in real life as well, right? We often end up down a path of not our choosing, or we didn't have full reign of the choices that are made, and we still have to contend with the outcomes.
Welcome to the first simulation in the Difficult Conversations in the American Classroom series, created by Teachers 21 and Educational Leadership Simulations. This simulation provides a context for discussing how we address sensitive issues such as race with our students, and how to support these conversations with teaching professionals and district staff. Click the Confirm Next button to the right to continue. In this simulation, you will be considering just how complex the issue of race is in the classroom, community, and broader societal landscape. You will play the role of the principal at Central High School, a suburban, racially and socioeconomically diverse school community of approximately 1,000 students.
Okay, so this is the context. We're going to learn a little bit more, but you are the principal, and we are collectively going to play the role of the principal and be making decisions in that role, and a little bit about the school, and we're going to learn a little bit more about some of the other elements that are at play.
Just as in most schools, your teachers have enormous pressure from all sides, but especially between the two occasionally conflicting priorities of ed evaluation the assessment of teachers by the administration, and student performance, how students are doing on high-stakes testing, as well as classroom grades. Students feel enormous pressure to perform, from teachers, from themselves, and from their parents. As principal, you are focused on improving student performance and were recruited by the superintendent for this purpose. Simultaneously, you are becoming more familiar with the school's culture and community. Looking at some of your stakeholder groups, parents are also concerned with student performance, and district administration is focused on raising test scores. Students have multiple areas of concern and interest that are wide-ranging, from personal accomplishment to societal messages about their role and how their school reinforces or rejects them. The school's leadership team is made up of the principal, assistant principal, director of guidance, director of student services, deans, housemasters, and the athletic director. On the next screen, you will begin the simulation. Good luck.
So one of the things that, in addition to, there are a few characters that will come across, right? There's the assistant superintendent, there's the school secretary, there is a community member, there is the teacher that we're going to meet in 11th, and obviously us. So we can always go back and review this cast of characters, if you will, because then we'll interact with others as well. But this is part of creating that broader context inside of which the experience is going to play out.
As you arrive at the school, you can't help but feel that March is coming in like a lion. Your secretary is Margot Prince, who has been in the building for 35 years and knows where all the bodies are buried. As you walk into your office, Margot reminds you of 2 meetings scheduled for today, which include a much anticipated session with the assistant superintendent of curriculum and instruction, who is interested in hearing more about PD initiatives at the school. Also, you have a meeting with a student group traveling to Mexico for spring break. You grab some time to attend to email. There are several messages that catch your eye.
Okay, so we're going to just
Email
pick
from
some
Jay
emails.
Marley, District Superintendent. As you've seen, data from the last round of standardized testing is in, and once again, scores are higher. Just wanted to write you a quick note to say congrats and keep up the good work. Great job.
That's from the superintendent.
Email from Kim Bea. Enough is enough. It seems that all my daughter does this year is take tests. All of these tests are so disruptive. She has her head filled with stuff, empties it on the test, and then has to make room for more stuff. What's the value in that? I want my daughter's learning to prepare her to think critically and deal with the shifting circumstances of life, not to be good at taking tests. Can we meet to talk about the school's mission?
An angry parent.
Email from Andrew Singer. I'm having some trouble preparing students for the next round of testing. They are engaged and enthusiastic about the material we are covering, and we are having some of the best discussions ever. My issue is that the discussions are slowing us down, and I don't know that I'll be able to cover all the material at this rate. Having to curtail most of the class discussion to catch up does not sound like the best plan. At the same time, I'm concerned about the students' test performance and my own evaluation. Can we meet to discuss how to balance these needs?
From the teacher.
Email from Kyle Joy. My child needs to dramatically improve their test scores for them to even consider going to college. What is being done to ensure that the focus on performance is laser sharp? Can we eliminate the pep rallies, assemblies, and concerts for the rest of the school year?
Different parent concern.
Seeing the emails about test scores has you thinking about the meeting with the assistant superintendent, and you turn your attention to plan for it. As you do, there's a knock at the door. It seems your guard dog, Margot, has stepped away from her desk. You open the door and 3 students are anxiously waiting to speak to you before the school day begins. One of them shows you her phone and a screenshot of a posting on social media. I am so sick of the teachers in my school. Today I asked nicely, and all I wanted to do was have the chance to talk with my friends and teacher about what happened yesterday, and of course she said no. Another unarmed black kid dead. Another white cop getting off without a scratch. These things matter. Instead, we kept talking about the Great Gatsby. What do I care about some rich guy living on Long Island who can't get his long-lost love when people who look like me are being murdered by the very people who should be protecting us? And the cops never seem to get in trouble for it. In this racist place, you can get in trouble for just talking about it. The limited view of the comment thread is both disconcerting and confusing to you, as there are some who wholeheartedly agree while others question what class time should even be used for. 2 examples. Mary writes, "I think you're being selfish. I need the class to prepare for AP and am glad the teacher did her job and taught English class." Sarah replied, "Of course you're thinking about the AP test. This is just one more way for you people to get ahead." You thank the students for bringing this to your attention. You close the door and wonder if this is simply a ranting or a more widespread problem. You've never sensed that racism is a concern within the building. As you contemplate your next steps, you wonder who is teaching Gatsby and whether you can determine what English teacher has this student in class in order to gather more information. You ask Margot to find out who the English teacher is for the student who made the initial post. Margot provides you with the information on the English teacher. With that in hand, which of the following is your best course of action? The blue information icons by each option indicate elaboration is available by hovering the cursor. After making your choice, click the next button to continue.
Okay, so we have context. We have a presenting issue, and now we're starting down the path of dealing with it, okay? So this is our first choice. I'm going to read the choices to you in case you can't read them because I realize it's small on the screen. And then we're going to, I'm going to ask you actually to choose one, and I'm going to put out a poll, and then we're going to talk about it and possibly go into breakouts. Okay, so we'll have the opportunity both for individual decision making or making a choice, and also the opportunity for discussion. So as you think about this, when I release the poll, it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4. That's actually more than 4 because we're using a generic poll. So just be thinking about 1, 2, 3, or 4 in terms of your choice so that when I release the poll, you'll know which one to choose, okay? So choice 1, wait until you're meeting with the assistants. So the question is, you have the information now about the English teacher, who it is that this class to find out more information. What are you gonna do? So wait until your meetings with the assistant superintendent and spring break student group have passed before visiting the English teacher. And the little additional insight there is, while addressing the post may be important, it is not urgent. Fulfill your morning obligations as scheduled. Or 2, inform the assistant superintendent that you would like to change the agenda for your meeting to brainstorm next steps with regard to this racially charged post. And the elaboration is, take advantage of this opportunity to seek support from the district level despite having a limited amount of information. Choice 3, visit the classroom teacher immediately to gather more information. Get as much information as you can before taking any other steps. Or choice 4, ask Margot to find out where the student is so you can get her in your office and insist that she take the post down as it is creating unnecessary controversy. The post is the problem. Address that head on and avoid other problems before they begin. Okay, so think about this for a moment, and then we'll have some discussion after. But if you could identify 1, 2, 3, or 4, maybe write it down on a post, because when I put the survey, it's probably going to cover this over. Be thinking about what you want to do, 1, 2, 3, or 4. I'm going to release the poll now. Now, if none of these choices is agreeable to you, you can always choose 5, and we'll talk about that. Okay, we'll give a few more seconds for any. It is anonymous, so you can make choices. Nobody's going to know what you chose unless you tell us. Okay, 3, 2, 1. End polling. Okay. So I want to share the results real quickly. So you see that right now we had 56% said free. Okay, to visit classroom teacher immediately. although inform Assistant Superintendent that you'd like to change the agenda for the discussion. Also got quite a number of votes. We're going to come back to there was some concern about number 5, which is you do something different. And again, as I mentioned before, that's great. Okay, these are not designed to be the be all and end all choices. And in fact, if there's an obvious choice, we don't even include it because, well, it's obvious and there's not going to be any critical thinking there. And if you have a different way of thinking about it or based on your experience, that is fabulous and we'd like to talk about it. But first, what I'd like to do is I'm going to put you into breakouts and we can talk about it in small groups and then come back and see. What I'd like to ask is somebody should be prepared from each group to present some of the discussion points. We probably won't get to everybody, but if somebody could be prepared from each group, that would be fabulous. And I'm going to release the breakouts. Any questions before we do that, by the way? Okay. So we're going to do 5 breakouts. And we're going to, and don't forget when you open the rooms, you have to join. You have to click to join. Okay, just wanted to check for those of you who haven't joined, Patrick, and is there, are you both okay? Okay. And Travis? Make sure everybody has a room.
Ken, there's a chat question. When the group comes back and when appropriate, just be aware of that.
Okay, and this one we can't actually, but all right, thank you. Okay, welcome back. I'm sorry if I cut off thoughts there, but in the interest of time, I am curious, does anybody want to volunteer? Just unmute yourself and speak from one of the breakouts.
Well, this is Katina, and in our breakout group, we talked about, so it was 4 of us, and so we talked about number 1, of course, nobody chose that one, but we talked about number 2 and number 3, and how we could easily see choosing one, not choosing one over the other. So for example, we definitely talked about talking with the assistant superintendent first, making them aware that there is a post out there and that we're gathering more information, but we didn't want anybody to be blindsided. And then with the same intensity, same thing with number 3, before saying anything to the assistant superintendent, getting as much information as possible so that when we do talk to the assistant superintendent, they're not asking us questions we can't answer. Like, is this student, does the student do this often? Was there something that happened? And so we were equally divided between the two. And
That's great. And obviously that does come up. And sometimes I would suggest that, as you're describing it, it depends on who you're thinking your assistant superintendent is, right? Or your style, right? If you have an assistant superintendent who is going to ask you for information, then you may be inclined to gather information first. If you have an assistant superintendent who is, don't talk to me unless you have information, then that may also give you some inclination. But these personalities, that part of the context is also relevant. So thank you, Katina. That's great. Somebody else?
Hi, Katina. Our group, we talked about 2 and 3 as choices also, and trust in that assistant superintendent was the driver for that decision. And in the number 3 decision is in social media, as long as you could walk back out your door and it'd be all over. It could mushroom into something really big. So while there was that calm before the storm, perhaps go get some more information before you kicked it upstairs, so you could have some more to say about it when you did go upstairs.
There was the thank you. There was the one of the things we often have some fun with sometimes is to identify which one you would never do, right? So instead of looking at which one you would do, which one you would never do, and then talk about why, or would there ever be a circumstance in which you would do it, even though you say you'd never, but can you imagine a circumstance? Now, some of these you can't, I'm guessing. And I was just pointed out to me that I guess it went viral, that decision in Georgia, where they had opened up the schools and a picture was taken of a hallway of students there, not everybody in masks. And
yes.
And the response to that, from what I understand, let's say maybe of one of those, when you talk about stimulus and response, maybe there wasn't, or I'd like to understand the thinking that went into that. But, again, there's often when we assume that people are actually thoughtful, there probably was a reason. And if we don't ask, we'll never find out what it was. But anyway, there's plenty of examples of those, I'm sure. But we did take a vote. Now, I guess I would ask, did anybody particularly want to change their vote? Okay, because sometimes what happens is that, and that's why we do the goal of, we release the poll first to have you actually be thinking, kind of to commit on the one hand, not to go with the flow, and then have the opportunity to speak, and then also see if maybe getting some insight from peers. This is a lighter touch in terms of this is more of a kind of a starting scenario choice that's pretty straightforward. But it just, it's always interesting to see if people actually change the way they think or what they would do based on, oh, I never thought of it that way. And all of a sudden they begin to see things differently. And that opportunity presents even inside of a singular scenario.
Hey, Ken.
Yes.
So this is Ron. I'm sorry I came into it
Hi,
late.
Ron.
I was really fascinated by this. So first of all, I made a choice before I realized number 5 was an option. Because I'm not sure any of the four best represent what I'd like to do. But clearly, those are all options that you've provided that do make some sense. But what isn't made sense is like, wouldn't I, as a leader, as a school leader, want to spend more time with a student just to probe kind of this feeling that this person is feeling, feeling around the culture of the school, the culture of the community. And to what extent does the school culture exacerbate that or help remedy that? And that would be really what I would be seeking to do before I would do something, before I would talk to the classroom teacher. I mean, the classroom teacher may be just following the culture of the school, which given the previous email seems like very, high achievement oriented, right? And maybe that's the problem, or maybe that's the solution. So those are things that entered my mind.
Well, I appreciate that, and thank you for sharing that. I was curious about the number 5, and it's really, really important that gets expressed, because you're right. That would be certainly, obviously, you'd want to know that, and you may know that, right? If you were actually in the building, you'd have a better sense of that, right? So there is that aspect of the manufactured component. But again, the goal of having choices in this manner is really to be provocative, whether it's about the choices that are there or the ones that are missing, because that would be a very meaningful conversation. Now, part of the challenge is that, like in a case study, right, there's no stakes, right? We can talk about a case and then just talk, right? And then decide what we're going to do, and then it's done. In this instance, we actually have to say, what are we actually going to do? Because we're actually walking down that timeline. So we're going to have to actually take an action, and it's got to be now, right? So you may, in the background also be trying to identify or finding some time to speak with the student. But is that the only thing you're going to do, or is that the first thing you're going to do? We get into that prioritization, and not to say that that's not what you would do or what others would do, but it forces us to parse that activity, because these things aren't instantaneous, right? Other things are going to come up, right? We try to do that with this idea of, that context, right? If we were left to our own and we could be presented with these gnarly challenges, and that there's really nothing else going on, so we can just focus on this, again, chances are we'd get it right more of the time. But when we've got 6 competing priorities and we've got 12 different, folks stakeholders trying to get our attention, and whatever else, and however we're feeling that day, right? All of these things come together, and we have to make, maybe suboptimal choices. But again, it's still going to be an experience, even if we're doing a choice that would be not the one we'd want to make, but we're still going to have the experience of dealing with the outcomes of that choice. But thank you for sharing. So can we go on? Any other questions, comments? All right, so we're going to choose 3 because we'll go with majority rules. And again, what we find in this is always the opportunity to say the "I told you so." For those who might have chosen something different, just you can remember. But anyway,
You decide to address this with the teacher immediately. On your way to see her, you receive a text message from the assistant superintendent who says she has seen the social media post and comment thread. She would like to meet with you before any action is taken. You return to your office to find the assistant superintendent waiting for you.
so there you have it. Okay, so before we can meet with the teacher, but all right.
The assistant superintendent begins by inquiring whether you have obtained more information from the teacher yet. You say no, but that you plan to. Perhaps it's best to come up with an action plan first. Given her district-wide responsibilities for supervision, evaluation, and professional development, you inquire if this is an isolated incident or part of a broader pattern. Her response suggests this is not the first instance. However, she reminds you that your first priority is to improve test scores, which includes gaps related to race and socioeconomic status. She does, however, want you to gather more information about this specific event. In addition to talking with the teacher, you both agree that talking to the leadership team is an important step, as well as getting input and information in order to figure out whether this issue needs to be addressed beyond the individual incident. After the conversation, you thank the assistant superintendent for her input and reconsider your path forward. After the assistant superintendent leaves, you're sitting in your office contemplating next steps. You notice your phone message light flashing and listen to your voicemail. A reporter from the local press, Louise Payne, has gotten wind of the social media post and would like you to confirm that your school is a hotbed of racial tension, and this is a part of a long-standing list of grievances that students have had as they have systemically been marginalized. You now have to consider whether or not to respond to him as you consider your path forward. How will you proceed?
So now we have our next choice. So we have the situation that's evolving that we need to contend with, and now we've gotten this call from the reporter. So what are we going to do? We can do choice 1, respond to the reporter's voicemail, so call the reporter back. 2, let's go ahead and meet with the teacher. Or 3, convene the leadership team and gain, let's see, I can do the elaborations there. So the choice 1, respond to the reporter's email, neutralize the situation by simply saying that the matter is being looked into and you will be back in touch again soon. Or meeting with the teacher, gather the specifics from the classroom teacher to get a better handle on the situation. Or 3, you need your leadership team to contribute, coordinate, and execute a response plan. So what are you going to do? 1, 2, or 3? Think about it, note it down. I'm going to release the poll. Okay, nice. We have a 4. That's great. Okay, give it a few more seconds. Okay, and we will. Oh, okay. Some got in last second there. Okay, share results. Okay, so it seems like 67% said meet with the teacher. You folks wanted to convene a leadership team, and there was a 4th response. So in this one, I'm not going to put you into the breakouts in the interest of time and going forward. But does anybody want to share what, I guess in particular, it's somebody who voted for the teacher, but I'd also be interested in the alternative response that wasn't there at all, as well as somebody who thinks the leadership team would be, again, not to say that you wouldn't obviously meet with the teacher if you're meeting with the team, and not to say that you wouldn't meet with the team if you're meeting with the teacher first. The question is, which do you do first? All right. Anybody want to share?
I chose the number 4, and I thought that it would be important to talk to the district communications person and the superintendent, just to let them know that the media is at the door, and to see if I could get any guidance about what I should be doing about that, or whether I should be handing it off to them.
That's a great point. And there may actually be a district policy which says you'd never do that anyway. I mean, it would you get kicked up to the media department. Absolutely, that's great. But so, can I ask what you would have done, assuming that so that the first one would be dismissed? Did you have a preference between 2 and 3?
I probably would just touch base with the leadership team first, because I think more heads are better than one.
Okay.
And I think that part of that would be just a quick touch base, and I anticipate that I'd end up meeting with the teacher, but just to kind of get a read of the room.
Excellent. Anybody else?
I said I wanted to meet with the teacher, but I was anticipating once I get my leadership team together, the first question they'll ask me is, what did the teacher say? So meeting with the teacher first was a way I had more tools to present to a team, so we could, as a team, make a decision with more facts.
That is an excellent point. And one of the things we find that, you know, when you think about if you're, and I don't know where you're coming from and how you're looking at this, but when we think about, you know, the difference between, the beauty of simulation is you can play them at any level, right? If you're an experienced administrator, then you're bringing more to the table in terms of this discussion. You've had these experiences or like something like that. And so that's kind of influencing your, how you approach things. On the other hand, if you're an aspiring leader or teacher leader, right? You've never been in the chair before. You're just anticipating, there's some things you can't necessarily know, right? You wouldn't necessarily, do we do this as a team? Do we, my inclination as an individual contributor would be to go and just do it that way. So it's just interesting to see, the different ways that decisions can actually, the ways that discussions can go, and also style, right? Am I inclined to do first because it's my job, I'm going to go and take care of this, or are we more collaborative? And that's not to say a right or wrong here. It is just, it takes into account people's styles. And it is an opportunity to get that kind of discussion going as well, relative to that both ways are valid, absolutely. And you just may have to make a choice. So again, thank you for sharing. Anybody else? Okay. So based on the results, we will go with number 2. We'll go meet with a teacher and let's see what happens.
You've decided you need to meet with a teacher. How will you proceed?
Okay, so we made that determination of that we're going to go meet, but it doesn't happen instantaneously, as I mentioned. Now we have to be a little bit more deliberate about how we're going to go about doing that. So we can, 1, email the teacher and ask her to come to your office as soon as her next class ends, right? It's still the middle of the day. Or 2, go into the teacher's class and ask her to see her out in the hallway. So interrupt. Or 3, send Margot, the school secretary, to get the teacher now. Or 4, email the teacher and ask her to stop by your office at her convenience. Okay, so the first one is to email her to come when her class ends. The second is go to her class and call her out. The third is to have her send the secretary to go bring her to you now, or email the teacher that she can come when at her convenience. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, or 4. I'm going to launch the poll now. Take a few more seconds. Okay, and we will end it. Okay. So it seems like most felt that we should go into the teacher and call her out into the hallway to speak with her. Why don't we go into our breakouts real quickly? This will be a short breakout, but talk about it. And if somebody could be prepared to share some insights, that would be great. But this one will be relatively quick, so be prepared for that. Go. Okay, welcome back. So, any volunteers to share? So the decision that the poll that came out of the poll was to go into the teacher's class and ask her out into the hallway. Thoughts?
This is Katina again. I'll share. In our group, I just talked about, I didn't choose that one only because of the nature of the conversation. I'm not sure if we'd have enough time to discuss it in the hallway. Wasn't sure the teacher's temperament, and how that would turn out. And so I actually chose a 5 on that one. And it was a combination of, number one, email the teacher and ask her to come see me at the class change, but also finding someone to cover her class while we were having the discussion, because I wasn't sure with the time in between classes if it was really enough. And I didn't want to get into a discussion and then the bell rings and she has to jump up to leave and we're nowhere near finished the conversation. So that's the only reason I chose the 5.
That is a great point. Thank you.
I chose the one where I went and did get the teacher out of the class. But I did consider the things that Katina talked about. I took someone with me to cover that person's class because I didn't know how long the conversation would be or whether we needed to, move to another space. So I arranged to have someone there to cover the class.
Excellent. Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, I selected number 4. Email the teacher and have her stop by the office at her convenience. What I posed the question in our group is, so what's the emergency? Is the emergency that particular teacher, or is it about the school culture? If it's about the school culture, then that takes a lot of time. And you're gonna have to have a long conversation both with the teacher and some exploration of other teachers. And so you gotta formulate a plan about how you're gonna approach this. And so I guess I'd say there's a desire to respond quickly, but you got to kind of take the context of what your solution or the problem you're trying to resolve and then move in that direction. So that's my perspective.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's interesting. We had an incident like this earlier in our school year, which was very unpleasant. And so from my perspective, I am feeling that pressure to react very quickly. But very quickly, there's times where teachers were in our sphere and we don't know what's happening outside. And in this instance, the kids knew more than the adults. And it was very quickly put on social media and the community reacted before the school could. And unfortunately, one of those results was community people posted the home address of young students. So by the school not reacting quickly, unfortunately, it was a school employee who knew the student, posted their home address, and that student had to be removed from her home temporarily because people showed up. And she was 10. Like it was tragic. It was horrible. So in my mind, I'm thinking I wanted to go to that teacher immediately so we could find out what was actually happening, and then we could pinpoint where we needed direct resources to protect our kids.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. And yeah, I mean, and that's what we find. I have to say, hearing the stories in a context can be so valuable in terms of just appreciating where one is coming from. I mean, one of the things that we find is, what other pressures are we feeling, or what's driving that, right? Was there a past experience? Was there, or what the title provokes, right? I mean, to Ron's point, if we didn't call this Difficult Conversations race, right? If the context that we set here was not, with the frame, if you will, was not that, this is something that was happening, but in the context of other things too, right? Might we approach this with less intensity, more intensity? Often it's the framing of what else is happening and what experience is this building upon that often influences the nature of how we react. And being cognizant of that, again, that situational awareness is critical, because not just for yourself, but also, I mean, what about how the teacher's going to respond, right? And how the students respond to you calling out the teacher. So, I mean, there's all kinds of things that one needs to, as you're all expressing, those are those consequences that we need to be prepared because they're going to be consequences, right? We may not know exactly what they are, but they're going to be there. And so the question is, are we prepared to deal with them? Okay. Anybody else before we make this choice? I mean, I realize I never manage time effectively in this because the conversations get so rich. And so, you know, we probably will run out of time before getting to the end of the sim. And so please be in touch if you want to see more. We can certainly share it with you if you don't have access to them, and be able to have that conversation further. So I will just put that out there. But in the meantime, let's see what happens if we go with the vote, which was, let's go and pull her out.
The teacher is quite flustered and clearly nervous. Apparently, she is not taken well to be summoned from her classroom, and neither have her students. In the space below, write how you would structure the conversation with the teacher. How would you begin? What would you say? What tone would you take? Note your rationale.
So this is obviously better done. You know, this would be a nice exercise to do in the breakouts. I think that we're probably not going to do this one in this instance. This is open-ended. It's not designed. It's not triggered. It doesn't trigger any responses. It's really just designed to give the other side, right? When we give you choices, you react to the choices. Well, what happens if we ask you what you would do, but don't give you choices yet, right? Because now we want to capture, as the points that were made before, well, this is what I would have liked to have done, but I didn't see that choice there. Well, here's the opportunity to say what you would do and how you would do it, because that's, you know, an opportunity to be free-form thoughtful and do it in a, you know, potentially in a group context, or this can be submitted as an individual exercise depending on how it's being deployed. But that's where the opportunity for the critical thinking is in this instance. And again, with more time, we would probably go into the breakouts and have you each formulate this. But for now, I think we will just proceed to the choice, which is,
Considering what you wrote on the previous screen from the options below, choose the one that best aligns with how you would begin the conversation.
okay, so if you're thinking about this now, how would you begin the conversation with this teacher? You've called her out of her classroom, you're in the hallway, she's clearly flustered, and maybe you're seeing some kind of reactions in the classroom from the students. So how are you going to begin this conversation? So we have 5 options, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Number 1, ask her if she has seen any of the recent social media posts by her students. Or 2, ask her if she has noticed any racial tensions in her classroom. Or 3, ask her why she hasn't reported that her classroom is a hotbed of racial tension. Or 4, ask her how things are going in class and whether there are any concerns that you would like to bring to your attention. Or 5, ask her specifically how the class is going with the teaching of Gatsby. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, and if you could have that ready. Go. Okay, give it a couple more seconds. We'll wrap it up. Okay, ending it now. Okay, so we have most are choosing 4. Ask her how things are going in class and were there any concerns that she would like to bring to your attention. And there were a couple of 6s. In the interest of time, we won't go into the breakouts, and I think people are leaving because of time. So any thoughts? Anybody want to share?
I chose asking her if she had concerns because there's a possibility something that occurred in class that might have led to the racially fueled post. And if that was the case, then there's more information I need than just what about the post.
A little more open-ended before you jump right into things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you, so there's a rapport that you have if you've established this trusting culture, which is important, that try to put her put her at ease about you being in front at the door. And that way it's not a leading question either. It's just I have a question for you, and relax. Even I used to poke my head inside the room and point my finger at the students to calm them down. They usually thought that was funny or whatever, and then back out and just it's an information gathering thing and no big deal.
I take it you were a 6.
Say that again?
You voted 6?
No, I voted what most people voted.
No, that's how things are going. Okay.
Put her at
Yeah.
ease.
I mean, that's right. I mean, that would also be, what's missing here, what you'd want to have talked about, right, is what is your relationship with this teacher, right? It's March, right? So you have a rapport with this teacher, and so that should be something that's discussed, right? Because you would, is this your normal thing? I mean, is it really rare for you to stick your head in the classroom? Then you'd be thinking about what the implications of that are. If it's more common that you would do this, and when you want to make her feel that she's not in trouble before asking the question, right? So all these things, right? So this is where we find that the benefits of this modality also is the whole social emotional piece, right? We don't have to call it social emotional stuff, but here would be a demonstration of whether you get it or whether you don't. Right? There are ways of doing this in a social emotionally sensitive way, and one that are less so. And so being able to be cognizant of that is critical in terms of how you convey. But again, this is something that we'd want to see discussed. But let's choose, let's see, stop that, close that. But let's move ahead so we can get a little bit further.
The teacher replies that the class is working through Gatsby, and she is doing her utmost to stay on course with her lesson plan. She volunteers that a student had asked that time be allocated to discuss implications of recent events, which she had denied. You relate the specifics of the post to her and ask for her perspective. Based on the conversation that ensues, it is clear that the teacher has some understanding of why this situation is complicated. She has thought about the student concerns, yet in her best judgment, supporting students in their academics will produce the best outcomes for them.
So here would be another, okay, so before, again, we give you choices, how would you, reflect upon how you'd respond to that, right? So, I mean, she's expressing that there are some trade-offs, and you may have some issue with how decisions that she's making or she's made, or, is there a coaching opportunity here? Is there, different ways that we can, that this can be approached. And again, to reflect upon that, and again, with a sensitivity to the social emotional issues, with the opportunity for demonstrating leadership, as well as decision-making, these are all the things that can be brought to play in terms of as you're working with participants, or as we would be working in whatever setting we might be in, to bring these issues up and out. But again, in the meantime, let us see how we go. We continue.
The teacher explains her understanding is that administrative support is more focused on raising test scores and not addressing current events. Therefore, she spends her class time focusing on academics. She is aware of legitimate student concerns and would welcome training and support to acknowledge these complexities with her students. You thank her for her forthright responses and tell her that you may need to speak with her again about this issue.
Okay, so to the point that was made earlier, we're getting some additional insights, although now it's a little bit after the fact, into the climate, right? And into not necessarily the climate that you've established, but one that has been established and that you're subject to as the leader. And so the opportunity to be thinking about the implications, it's not just the decision, but it's the context in which you're making that decision is going to come to play.
Reflect on the discussion with the teacher and your next steps. You are thinking you may want to meet with other stakeholders before convening the leadership team. While you ponder your options, you check your inbox. More interesting information to consider. Email from Dr. Nathan Turner. I have recently learned that a high school English teacher shut down an important conversation about race and current events. Yet again, your school has stifled the important voice of our children as they are trying to make sense of what's happening in the world. As a parent in this district for 15 years, I have repeatedly seen this whitewashing of serious societal concerns. We gain nothing by ignoring the problems of our society with the children. We need to equip them to face the world they are about to enter, In fact, I am seeing this problem district-wide. My son, who is in 5th grade in Mr. Blank's class, is studying slavery this year and is being taught little more than it is a ride on the Underground Railroad. I think it is important that we address this matter. Please call me as soon as possible at 555-6473. Email from Rose Glass. I have caught wind of some of the race-related concerns through recent social media postings. I wanted to let you know that I'm a skilled trainer on issues of diversity in the workplace. I understand that schools are unique entities, but if I can be of support, please don't hesitate to contact me. Considering your conversation with the teacher and the content of the emails, which of the following is the best path forward?
So we have 3 choices now after we've had the conversation, we got the email from the parent, and now, and the email, the opportunity to work with this trainer. So choice 1, email the staff and faculty to inform them of the post. Your goal is to be out in front of the problem and control the conversation before misinformation affects morale. Or 2, convene an assembly during the event blocks to address the issue. This would allow you to give a consistent message to the entire school community before the day is complete. Or 3, meet with the leadership team. This allows you to communicate information that has been gathered enough to make a plan about how to best proceed. What do you think? 1, 2, or 3? And some of these, we've talked about, you know, some of the implications of some of these already and some of the sharing that has happened. 1, 2, or 3? Okay, give it a couple more seconds. All right. So it seems like number 3, meet with the leadership team, has the most votes. I want to share, especially the one who chose 4. I mean, it's interesting, the story that was told earlier about Sarah, that you told, that, you know, it like you see about the email staff and faculty to get ahead of it, right? Oh, too late. And so, you know, it's a goal. It can be a goal, but obviously making decisions about, all right, let's say it's gotten ahead of us, right? So this is not, this was done obviously before this. It wasn't just done around the current circumstance, but something certainly to keep in mind. Any thoughts?
I put email the staff, but I would do 1 and 3 simultaneously. I would email the staff to be like, leadership is aware of this. Please let us know if you have more information. And then meet with my leadership team and see if we got more information.
Right, and that's often, like, we could put another choice in there that says, you know, 1 and 3 or 1 and 2
Yeah.
or 2 and 3, clearly, and that's great because you'd want to be doing both. It might say, okay, so what do you know, the question is what are you going to do first? But again, like you said, these are 2 that you might be able to do instantaneously, but you would probably do, even if it's not exactly at the same time, but they would go, you're prioritizing them both. So somebody is raising their hand. Go ahead and speak.
Hi, yeah, I was just wondering, maybe I've missed it, and we talked about it in a breakout and none of us could figure this out. Are they going to get to see anything about their responses as to why something they picked may or may not have been a good choice? And is it like smart software where because they pick one answer, it takes them down a certain path that would continue? And then the third question is, do they get the option to not pick? Because I think for some of them, that's just a cop-out and they don't want to make a decision. And I would feel like this is a safe place to make a decision and then see what happens.
So the answer to your last question is they do not get to not make a decision.
That's good. Okay.
So there is no cop-out. You have to make a choice and deal with it. And that's part of the goal, right? That's an experience. That's right. It's not about, nobody's assessing this, right? Nobody's gathering the information to say how you did and whether this demonstrates that you're a good leader or a bad leader or whatever it is. This is just to have an experience and the opportunity to actually have the discussion. But I do want to show you, so in the interest of time, I'm going to jump now.
Given the input from the leadership team, which of the following options?
So here you have a chance of what you would do and then what you'd prioritize
You've selected your top
and why you
upward moving
prioritize
items
it.
you
And
chose
so
as priorities.
you can see we do some
Again,
multiple
in this
choice.
case, you and your leadership, you feel that you've not only got a clear set of next steps, but you also have a sense of ownership on the part of the leadership team. By engaging them in the process, the execution of your
Okay,
In
and so
this
now this is
simulation-
how it would wrap up. Okay, so now to your question, and again, in the interest, I want to leave some time for additional questions. We would have finished, so you saw that there was a multiple choice that we would have selected, and then to prioritize amongst the things that we think of those 8, which ones we would do, which ones we would do first. Now we want to give feedback. So as I mentioned, right, judgment and consequences are important, but the experience is only going to be a learning opportunity if we can reflect. And so there obviously was some reflection going on during the decision making, but at the end of the sim, we do want to provide some insight into the decisions that were made. Again, these aren't designed to assess whether you're good or bad. It's to look at the decisions that were made and the implications of those choices relative to the trade-offs and additional insight. So we've identified some variables that are at play, right? So from a stakeholder participation perspective, each decision is going to affect these variables in some way, shape, or form, and I'll show you what that is in a moment. So we do have prioritization, involvement, and identification on this page. Then there's communication, teacher, difficult conversations, community building. Oh, there's one other one. Oh no, it's not showing. Okay, and then we get to the narrative. So to your question, we actually do give them the reflection of, remind them what the choice was, what the learning objectives in that scene were, and what the specific, what their choice was, and what the specific effect of their choice was.
Are they able to print this so they can go
Yeah.
back and look over time and see how they've changed maybe?
Yes, yes. And this can then be either handed in, reported, so depending on whether you're doing this synchronously or asynchronously, it can be captured and reported if you're doing it individually, or teams can reflect upon this if you're doing it in groups.
Have you used it where you've assigned like the same topic where people all pick one topic and do it on their own and then they come together and talk about it? Like we have a list of all the topics that are available?
So typically we'd actually assign the Sims so that they're all doing the same one, but
Okay.
that's up to you. I mean, depending on so let me show you this real quickly. So you'd see then you'd have it for each of the 6 choices that were made. So you'd see that feedback. But to your point, this is one of the simulations of a library of about, right now it's 29. So in terms of, one experience is great, but it's just one experience. But when you're thinking about the overall challenges of leadership, the overall challenges of development, the opportunity to engage in obviously different problems of practice, different experiences, and they can be framed any way you want, right? This one we actually call out as one about difficult conversations about race. But in any one of these, race could it can be a feature, or equity is a feature, because if you're not conscious of these things all the time, then chances are you're going to make big mistakes, right? So even though we call it something, if you're not cognizant of all the other things, then that's at your peril. And so, but that's the opportunity when we're thinking about this idea of the value of experience. This is how we approach it, and the opportunity, obviously, if when one engages in this kind of approach.
Hi, Ken, Paul Chapman, thank you. Good session. On the P-cell coverage of these 29 cases, how well do you do on total coverage of the P-cells?
So here is the full list. We do okay. There's always opportunities for more. and for better. One of the things that we found fascinating is that we have been responsive to the requests from the field, right? So this is what our contributors have said, and that can be anybody, by the way. It's not, we don't have requirements other than you have experience in a building. These are the problems of practice that in fact get presented. What we found fascinating is, like, instructional leadership is not a big one. That seems to be a known quantity. It's the other things that get in the way of our ability to execute from a leadership perspective, or the ability to implement instructional leadership. It's the implement part that's the problem. So anyway, but in terms of the way that the scenarios manifest, because of the context of being in a building or in a district, depending on what level the sim is at, you end up touching upon multiple trade-offs, multiple standards each time. Any other questions? And I'm happy to stay on, by the way, so I don't need to close it at 3:30, but I do appreciate everybody's contribution to this and participation. Clearly these are issues that we are contending with, that we will need to contend with, that are critical that we attend to appropriately. We're not going to get it right, but we do have to keep trying, obviously. And the more experience we have, so that we're not trying stuff out with real students or with real staff or with real community members, the better off we can be. So with that, be interested, love to chat with anybody further about this. Happy to answer questions now, but thank you again for your participation, and look forward to being in touch.
Can we get copies of the slideshow in case we want to share with our students so they'll know that these are particular experiences that may help them?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, so it'd be actually helpful if you would email me, but
sure. What is your email?
It's kspiro@schoolsims.com.
Thank you for your help today.
Oh, thank you for your participation. Anybody else?
Ken,
Yes.
so if I send K Spiro and I say, could you send that slide presentation to me? I'll get it. I'm at Longwood University, and you get that to me. And
Yes.
okay, that sounds good. Thank you for the session. Very good.
You're welcome. Look forward to working with you. You guys there?
Hey, yeah, I think that went really well, Ken. Good job.
Hey, this is still being recorded, so let's drop off and talk at a different medium.
Okay.
Alrighty, bye.